Hi. So we'll continue with the series of Bill Clinton's My Life. And this time I finished the whole book. I read a lot since my last video, and there's a lot to cover, and it will be the last of this series. And so with that being said, let's get started. So from this series, first he worked on mental illness, and then work on helping people who have mental illness, and then he worked on gun safety proposals, and then he worked on environmental and labor rights, and then he worked on protecting endangered animals. Then, Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif visited Washington, asked him to mediate the relationship between India and Pakistan. But Clinton researched and found that Pakistan is wrong and asked Pakistan to withdraw their troops back across the line of control, but he did agree to train 60 Pakistani troops if they agreed to go to Afghanistan and get bin Laden. And then he started a tour starting from Appalachia first, and then Kentucky, Clarksdale, Mississippi, East St. Louis, Illinois, Pine Ridge Reservation, Phoenix, Arizona, west from Los Angeles. He went to these places to consider get more investment to these areas. And then he invited the new Israel leader, the one who plays piano and graduated from Stanford, invited him, his name is Barack, invited him to dinner. And then after he bought a farmhouse 40 miles from Manhattan for their retirement. So it's about a little longer than 1 year before he retires, so that's why he's planning for the retirement and bought the farmhouse. But there's a lot to cover after he bought the farmhouse. And he sent American foreign policy workers to Gaza to support Barak and Arafat, which is the leader of Palestine, to the next steps of peacemaking. And then he visited New Zealand for APEC summit, and then he met with President Jiang for the WTO issue, and then he met with Japanese Prime Minister Obuchi and Korean leader Kim Dae-jung to discuss North Korea. And then he met with Vladimir Putin, which is Yeltsin's successor, and he went to open a UN General Assembly, or he helps or attend opening of UN General Assembly. And then Republicans proposing tax cut that's burden to America's economy again, which will cost around 1 trillion in the next decade if he approved it. So of course he did not approve it. And then he celebrated the increase of adoption of children of foster care system. And then he talked about a judge. His name, I will link it here, which is Ronnie White. He's the first African American Supreme Court judge, and what he did is that he had voted to uphold 70% of death penalty cases that had come before him. More than half of those he had voted reverse. So he really values people's life and reconsider before he decide, okay, someone deserved to die. And then Starr is still trying to investigate him. The cost of the investigation is already $70 million in all these years, and the investigation's finally coming to an end. So no more investigations. And he planned to make a presidential library after his presidency. And then he visited Turkey, Greece, Italy, Bulgaria, and then back to America. There's 20 million new jobs now, and the lowest female unemployment rate since 1953. Then he continues to work on Medicare, and then he talks about global interdependence. Barack seemed to not handle, like Barack is the leader of Israel, seemed to not handle everything as good. For example, he handled the Syrian and Israel relationship not so well. Then Bill Clinton passed a hate crime bill, which is to go against hate crimes. And then he worked more on Medicare and college aid. And then he worked on increasing fund for technology research. Then he prepares the nation for the biggest security challenge, includes cyber terrorism, bioterrorism, chemical terrorism. Then he flew to Switzerland to address World Economic Forums, and then more education and gun safety. And then he toured schools in Kentucky, Iowa, Minnesota, Ohio to push education package they made. So they made an education package to help with education, and he's pushing these packages to these areas. And then he went to visit Portugal, Germany, Russia, Ukraine, and visited a few more countries. And he tried to settle Israel and Syrian Palestine relationship. And he gets to know Barack a little more. He thinks he's actually brave and brilliant, but had a hard time listening to people who didn't seem to see things the way he did. Then he worked on Millennium Debt Relief Effort, which is to forgive bilateral aid directly to poor countries and at the same time spent on healthcare, education, poverty reduction. And then he worked on $300 million program to provide one good meal a day to 9 million children if they come to school. And then it's the G8 in Okinawa. After he's back, Clinton reflected on the country. We were better off, and not just economically, but jobs were up, and so are the adoptions. The debt is down, and so is the teen pregnancy. And then Clinton gives speech to Democrat conventions, which now is the presidential election again, so he gave speech there. Now my hair is a little grayer, my wrinkles are a little deeper, but with same optimism and hope I brought to the work I loved so 8 years ago, I want you to know that my heart is filled with gratitude. The future is now in your hand. You must think hard, feel deeply, and choose wisely. So that's his speech. And then he visited Colombia with 6 House members and 3 senators, vetoed another bill, and then went to UN for Millennium Summit. There he gives speech, and here's the highlight of his speech. Everyone counts. Everyone has a role to play, and we all do better when we help each other. So that's his speech. And then he come home, the median income risen by more than $1,000, and number of Americans without health insurance has dropped by 1.7 million the previous year. And then Barak, which is the leader of Israel, invited leader of Palestine, which is Arafat, to his home for dinner. But even though that peaceful action happened, that there is still violence began again between Palestine and Israel police. Large Palestine demonstrations got heated, and Israel police start shooting rubber bullets, but it still killed a number of people, including a Palestinian boy died in his father's arms, and Israel Palestinian people dragged two Israel police and beat them to death, and then dragged the dead body on the streets proudly. And I think that's just sick, to drag dead bodies of police on the streets. That's like really disrespectful towards death. Death should be respected. Um, you should bury people, you should pay the respect, you should leave the dead to die in peace instead of dragging their bodies around. I think these Palestinian people really should go have some serious therapy and serious education, and the Israeli police should also be trained to solve things more calmly and bravely as well. So and then it comes to Middle East political drama. And then Clinton signed China trade bill. And then there is terrorist attack and 17 American sailors are killed by explosives. Clinton sent people to investigate in it, which in the end it seems like it's the work of Bin Laden. And then he flew to Sharm el Sheikh for summit to stop Middle East violence, which is mostly around Israel and Palestine. And Barak and Alfred is there too. They're so mad at each other that Barak want violence to stop, but Arafat want an inquiry into alleged excessive use of force by Israeli military and police. So Clinton team worked out a security plan for both sides to have to sell it to them as well. And Alfred agreed to the plan, but Barack seemed to see if violence would really subside, which subside means to reduce and soothe down. And then Alfred needs to agree to the new plan, and other Middle Eastern leaders are also like trying to mediate in between, and then Alfred end up agreeing to the new plan. Now back at home is the memorial service for the 17 American sailors that was killed. And then they signed a trade agreement with Jordan's King Abdullah, which Jordan is a country in Middle East, and then campaign for other Democrats he supported for the upcoming elections. He went on 60 radio interviews for Al Gore, which is the nominee for American president, and then a person named Joe, which is not Joe Biden, it's another Joe, and the local Democrats. And then Hillary won more of her election. She also went on elections. And then a trip to South Korea, Japan, China, and then follow up on Middle East peace, mostly Arafat's Gaza peace, and then celebrate 200th anniversary of White House, and then communicate with Singapore Prime Minister. And then he went to Vietnam for a historic visit. And then there's the vote count politics. Because the way they count the votes right now have an advantage for Bush, But if they count the votes in a different way, then Bush's count will be less after the recount. So they're having some politics on the how to count the votes. And then Clinton flew to Ireland and then England, and then the recount again. There was struggle and Bush versus Al Gore, and in the end, Bush won. And then everybody was like really mad. They think Bush won by the vote count trick. So Bush won the presidency. And then Clinton had tea with the English Queen. And then he came back home. And then he worked hard on secure $1 billion to repair schools and 25% increase in fund to hire 100,000 more teachers. And then he turned around the failing schools. He worked on that. And then large increase in biomedicare research to improve medications and health, curing health issues. And then healthcare coverage for welfare recipients and disabled people moving into workforce again. And then Bush came to White House for the same meeting he's had with Bush's dad 8 years earlier. Bush asked him how to do a good job. Clinton said he should put together a good team and try to do what he thought was right for the country. And then he followed up more on Israel and Palestine's peace issue to so that it will meet the UN standard. And then there's the vice president election. And then it's his last Christmas in the White House. And he signed a few more treaties, including this one. America joined the International Crime Court, which Republican is strongly opposed to because it sent soldiers to foreign lands would be halted before the court for political purposes. But he believed the treaty was now drafted in a manner that he was convinced would prevent that from happening. And then Clinton invited Arafat to the White House for New Year. Egypt also invited Arafat, but Arafat came to see Clinton instead. Clinton reflected, many Palestinians and Israelis are still committed to peace. Someday peace will come. And then Hillary won New York's new senator. So Hillary became New York's new senator. And Clinton was so excited for it. Afterwards, he went on tour to places that's been especially good to him, which is Michigan, Illinois, and said farewell to New Hampshire. In Dover, he sent his last message to Congress, the unfinished work of building one America, and his final report with recommendations on education, healthcare, employment, criminal justice system, immigration policies, hate crime bill, reform voting law. So he sent his last message to the Congress regarding these things. And then he left White House on the last trip of his presidency, going home to Little Rock to address Arkansas's legislature. Clinton reflected, I was looking forward to my new life, to build my library, going public service work through my foundation, supporting Hillary, and having more time for reading, golf, music, and unhurried travel. He wrote his note to President Bush just like how Bush's father left a note for him 8 years ago and walked out of the Oval Office for the last time. He stepped out of the door with arms open wide. The entire residence staff gathered to say goodbye. Many of them become like family. The housekeeping staff, the florist, the butler, etc. Not knowing when he will see them again. Bush came later. They drank coffee and chatted for a few minutes. And then, within an hour, the peaceful transfer of power that has kept our country free for more than 200 years has taken place again. My family said goodbye to the new first family, and after 8 years as president and a half a lifetime in politics, he was private citizen again, but a very grateful one. Still pulling for my country, still thinking about tomorrow. So that's the end of his presidency. And afterwards, it's epilogue, which is before it was the memoir of his political life, and now it's his direct message to the readers. So he wrote the reason that he wrote this book is to tell the story of America in the last half of 20th century, to describe as fairly as I could the forces competing for the country's heart and mind, to give people a sense of what it's like to be president. And then reflection on US government and system, which is two-party systems, the progressive and the conservative debating what to change and what to preserve. And his reflection on growth. When change is forced upon us by events, we are all tested. And then Clinton's reflection on the history of American government. Promote basic safeguards for labor, provide for the poor, the elderly, the infirm, protect our natural resources from plunder, advancing civil rights and women's rights, to define, defend, and expand our union. And then he reflected on his presidency and the task he did for the Americans, which is new jobs, new homes, the college aid, and safer neighborhoods. And his words on terrorism. The interdependent world we live in is inherently unstable, full of both opportunity and forces of destruction. It will remain so until we find our way to a more integrated global community of shared responsibility, shared benefits, and shared values. And then to build that kind of world cannot be done quickly. And things Clinton feel the world needs to overcome is overcome poverty, ignorance, disease, and bad government. And then Clinton feel the Americans and the world needs is to end the age-old compulsion to believe that our differences are more important than our common humanity. And then Clinton motivate the American people. Our nation will not be undone by terror. We will defeat it. And then his note on self-alert. We do not compromise the character of our country. And lastly but not least, his goal for himself. Becoming a good person is a lifelong effort. And that ends the book. This book of his life by Bill Clinton. So that's the end of the series. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you have a better understanding of what happened in the world in the perspective of the American president. And this will be the end of the series. Hope you enjoy everything.